Hello and welcome to another episode of Turning Readers into Writers with me, your host, Emma Dhesi. And today I want to talk about how there is no right or wrong. This is something I hear quite a lot of writers talk about. That feeling of wanting to get things right and being scared to get it wrong. And I want to reassure you that there genuinely is no right or wrong in this. There are guidelines, of course. Absolutely, there are guidelines. And we see those guidelines in things like story structure, scene structure, show, don't tell, the different types of points of view that there is, the different approaches that you can have to developing good characters. And that can be all the way through from, doing character interviews with the people that you want to include in your stories. It can include looking at the flaw that your character has or the wound that they have and what they're looking to, how they're looking to kind of heal that or get over that. People talk about what a character wants and what a character needs, those two different things. You can use things like personality tests. My good friend Kat Caldwell over at Pencils and Lipsticks, that's what she uses. She uses personality tests for her characters to get a feel for how they would respond to a given situation based on their character type. So there's lots of different ways of doing that. Of course, as we know, there's lots of different story structures. There's the 3-act structure. There's Save the Cat. There's the hero's journey, which has now evolved into lots of different journeys, like the heroine's journey, the virgin's journey, lots of different ones. So there's lots of guidelines out there on how to write a story. But equally, you don't have to adhere to these. It's one of those crazy things about being a creative. You don't have to adhere to anything. It's whatever comes out of your imagination and your creativity, whatever's going on in the back of your brain. I mean, if you think about it, some very, very extreme literary fiction doesn't seem to adhere to any of the guidelines at all. I'm thinking of one story I read last year or attempted to read last year called We're Not Talking About This. And it was basically written as a series of tweets, a whole book written as a series of tweets. To me, it made absolutely no sense whatsoever. I could not get into it at all, did not enjoy it in the least. But a lot of people did. It was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize, and it broke, I would say, pretty much every guideline out there, but it still had a readership. It still was enjoyed by a lot of people, and it still works for many people. So I want you to understand that there's no right or wrong. There's kind of what comes out of your creativity, comes out of your heart, and what feels authentic and interesting to you. So that's all very good and well, but say you're not wanting to write something that's particularly out there literary. You're actually wanting to read something that's a little bit more mainstream, has a good story structure, does have good sound character, and there's a story there. You want to tell a story. Again, there's still no right and wrong to this. You can approach it in any which way that you want to. And so when I hear students say, I don't want to get this wrong, I want to get this right, I think it's with a hope that they'll write 1 or 2 drafts and that'll be them done. So if they get it right the first time, then they'll only have to write 1 draft, and then they'll do a second round of revisions, which will be very minimal, just checking all the small stuff, making sure everything's good to go. They won't feel that there's a lot of secondary work to be done to refine and revise the work. And they won't have those moments where they feel that it's all too much for them, or it's all too difficult, too complicated, but that it should be this smooth process whereby they get it right the first time and they feel really great at the end of that draft. And before you know it, we're off to query or we're off to publish. And I can totally understand that. That would be the ideal, wouldn't it? That would be wonderful if that's what happened every time. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. Unfortunately, you're very, very unlikely to get it right first time. Even very seasoned writers who have written many books, are writing in the same genre, have written in the same series for multiple books, they're still not going to get that first draft right, in inverted commas. They're going to be closer to getting it right than you or I, who are perhaps writing a standalone, perhaps creating a new world, perhaps writing your first book. It's inevitable, absolutely unavoidable that you're going to get things wrong, in inverted commas, because you're learning as much as anything. You're learning what those different guidelines are out there in the writing world. You are learning what it takes to write a full-length novel, a long piece of fiction, as opposed to a scene or a short story. It's a very different beast. You're also learning your own process. And I cannot emphasize this enough, actually, that the process is such a huge part of your writing life. And it takes time to get to know what your process is and understand the peaks and troughs of that and the tweaks that you'll make with every book that you write. So you're learning a lot. You're learning even what genre you want to write in if you're writing genre fiction. This happens to a surprising number of people. They start off thinking that they're going to be writing in one genre. You know, maybe that's what they read. That's what they want to write. And so think that's what's going to happen. And then turns out, oh, actually, a completely different story comes out. And I think this happens for both plotters and pantsers. You know, you can plot, say you plot to write a mystery and thinking that's the book that you want to write. But actually, when you come down to drafting it, what becomes apparent is it's more about the love story in this mystery. And it can take a bit of time to actually uncover the genre that you really want to write in, or what's really pulling your heartstrings. And that's certainly been the experience for me. I thought I would write literary fiction because I grew up on the classics, read very widely. I thought that would be my big influence. Then it turned out that I seemed to write more of women's fiction, but my women's fiction was very, very dark, darker than your average. And whilst I enjoyed that, it was just, I could sense that things weren't quite right with it. There was a bit of misalignment going on. And so I realised actually what I needed to do was lean into that dark side, and now writing psychological thrillers. So it's taken me a few iterations, it's taken me a few years to figure out, okay, where is it that my storytelling instinct lies, and it's with thriller. And you might find the same, that you feel or you think you're going to be writing in one way, but actually your instinct pulls you in another direction. Because again, there's no right or wrong with this. It's whatever is within you at that time. So going back to thinking about, okay, you're writing your first draft and you want to get this right, or you're thinking, if you're planning out your story, you want to make sure you've got all the beats in there and you've got them at the right point in time. Because you've diligently read around Save the Cat, or you've diligently read around the hero's journey, and you know what's involved and you know all of those beats. And you want to make sure you get them right. But then when it comes to the actual writing, when you sit down to write the prose, things come out differently. And the story evolves so that it hits the beats either before or after you expected to, before or after the percentage that you're given by the teachers of the different story structures. Does that mean that you're getting it wrong? Well, you may well feel that it is. You may well feel that, do you know what, I haven't hit this particular point at 35%. I must be doing something wrong. There must be something missing from my manuscript. And you're racking your brains trying to think what it is. But in actual fact, it turns out there's nothing wrong with what you've written. It's just that your story is slightly nuanced within those guidelines that Save the Cat gives, or that hero's journey, or any of the others. I'm picking up those two because they're the most commonly known, but it could be any story structure out there. Even with your standard 3-act structure, which is the one I like best, it might not be at 25% that you move into Act 2. It might be at 30 or 35, or it might be at 20% that you kind of move into Act 2. But that doesn't mean that your story is wrong. It just means that the nuance within your storytelling and the pace with which you've got your storytelling is unique to that story. So again, I'm just repeating myself a bit here, but I want to really hammer it home that it's not right and it's not wrong. If your intuition is telling you that this is where this point in the story needs to happen, then you've got to follow that instinct. You've got to follow your intuition. And what I want you to remember too is that this is your first draft, perhaps. And so you're still feeling out the story for yourself. You're still getting to know the story, your characters. Even if you've plotted it, even if you've planned ahead, there's only so much you can plan ahead for. There's only so much you can create on the paper before you start. The magic of storytelling, the magic of novel writing comes in the actual writing. And so it's only once you sit down to write the prose, write the dialogue, get into that scene and let your imagination take over, that's where you get those little bits of magic come from. And that's where you get to know your characters so much more deeply. And their little nuances come out and their little character quirks come out because you've spent time with them and you've got to know them. So it's really important to know that your story is going to be told in its own way. There is no absolute right or wrong in this. You've got to do what is right for your story. I always recommend doing a bit of a gut check. You know, when you think about the storyline and how it's going, or say you've just finished a writing session and you've finished a scene, or you're halfway through a scene, do a little gut check. You know, when you think on what you've written, how does it feel in your body? Does it feel that, yeah, do you know what? You've got this is going well, you're on the right track? Or is there something about it that's just in your body, you know, it's not quite right. It's not quite right. We're going to have to make some tweaks here. So that is absolutely fine. And in fact, it's more than fine. It's one of the things I think that's essential, is being able to feel that in your body, that things are going well and going right, and that your intuition is kicking in there, and your own discernment for storytelling can be trusted, because you have undoubtedly read a lot of books, and so you've taken in a lot through osmosis. Now, I know that reading a story and writing a story are very, very different skills, but you will still be able to use what you've learned through reading and apply it to how you feel about the story you're telling yourself. And if you're really honest with yourself, you'll be able to say, yes, it's working, or no, it's not. So if it's not working, what can you do? Well, one of the easiest things to do is just to make a note somewhere on your pages to say, okay, this isn't working quite right. I need to come back and re-examine this in the next round of revisions. And if you've got an idea of what should happen instead, jot that down too. And then you carry on. You don't let it hold you up. You don't go back to the beginning and start the whole process all over again. You keep writing forwards. So you make a note of what you think is not quite right and that you want to tweak, but then you continue writing forward, because the most important thing for you to do in those early drafting stages is to finish the draft. You need to get that first draft finished, have a beginning, a middle and an end. Doesn't matter if they're not perfect, doesn't matter if there's lots of bits missing out. You just need to be able to tell yourself that story from beginning to middle to end. So what happens if you're halfway through and you realise that, yeah, this isn't quite working, I've got this wrong, I don't like it? I want you to know that's not a reflection of you as a writer, of how good or bad a writer you are. It's a reflection of where you are in your process. It's a reflection of where you are in telling this particular story. So understand that when things go wrong, when you end up taking your character down a side path that oh, it's not where you intended. That's not what you wanted to do. And you might not even know how you got there. You're just going with the flow and somehow you've ended in this space. That's okay. You get to backtrack, or if you can you find a way to bring the story back round to where you want it to be? Because that sideline you've taken things down might not necessarily be bad. It's put you in a bit of a pickle for the time being, because you're trying to figure out, okay, is this a good part of the story? Can I keep this in? Can I make it workable? Or do I need to kind of go back a few chapters and then take things in a different direction? And that definitely happened to me on my first book. I ended up going down a tangent, could not see a way to bring it back round to the story I was trying to tell. There was nothing wrong with that tangent in and of itself, but it just couldn't make it work in this particular story. So I had to backtrack to a suitable point and then continue writing forward again. But hear me when I say this. When you get things in inverted commas wrong like that, I want you to understand that doesn't say anything about you as a person. It doesn't mean that you're not good enough to tell a story. It doesn't mean that you're not worthy enough to tell a story. It doesn't mean that all your decisions are bad. It doesn't mean that you cannot change your mind. It's not a reflection of you. And I think we get very worried about that in being creatives, is that our art says a lot about who we are, or we think that people are going to see what we write and view it as a reflection of ourselves, of our principles and the way that we live our life and the way that we think, when that's not necessarily so. It's the character who's having these opinions and judgments. And also, if we get our story wrong, if we're not writing in a way that we think is correct, or we're not getting it right first time, or we're not telling the story we want to tell first time, that it's taking a few iterations to tweak it and get it to where we want to be, that in itself is not a reflection of you as an individual, who you are, how good or bad you are, how right or wrong you are, how talented or untalented you consider yourself to be. It's just a part of the process. These are your ideas that are coming out from the back of your brain. So take ownership of those ideas and be proud of those ideas that came out, These are unique and special to you. And in another story, they might have been absolutely perfect. But in this story, you've realised that they're not quite working. And so you get the opportunity to take control of that and say, okay, I acknowledge this is not working, so I'm going to take it out and I'm going to change things, because you are the creator of this universe that you're creating. You are the god of it, and you get to make changes as you see fit. It reminds me of my own process recently when I've been writing a story, and I have the geography of the story very clear in my head. And we were talking about somebody's house and where their house was situated. And my coach was saying to me, well, why don't you have it so that the car goes into the river? And I said to her, oh, but the cottage isn't near a river. And it took me a while to kind of twig that the cottage can be beside a river because I created it. This cottage doesn't really exist. I create it. So if I need to change something or mold something to fit better with my story, I can do that. I can absolutely do that. So that didn't mean that I was being stupid. It didn't mean that I was not meant to tell this story. It's not a reflection of me as an individual, but it was so concrete in my head that it took me a moment to see that I was in control of this and I could change it. And so all of this is to sort of lead back to that beginning point, that there is no right or wrong, that you get to be the master of your own universe here, whether that be the characters and the location and the geography of where your story is taking place, all the way through to the writing style. Do you want to use speech marks or do you not? Not all books use speech marks in them. Some use a dash. So you get to choose that. It might be that you're going to try a whole different type of story structure that you're making up and you're trying out, and you're going to see how it goes and see how it goes, how your readers like it. It might be that they don't like it, but that's okay. You're just trying, you're experimenting, you're doing what feels right to you. But equally, they might love it. This might be something new, a different way of telling a story that your readers really enjoy. So remember, there's no right or wrong, and any choices you make that you feel are, in quotes, wrong, can be changed at any time. You are the master of your own universe. And I also want you to just be reminded that your writing, your creativity, your artistry is not a reflection of you as a person, as an individual, as a person in this world. It's not a reflection of you. You are not the story you are telling. You are a separate being, a separate entity. And don't judge yourself by that, because it's so easy for us to fall into judgment. And as humans, 9 times out of 10, we will see the negative rather than the positive. So just remember, you are not your writing. You are a separate entity from it, and that there is no right or wrong. Okay, if this was you and you needed to hear that today, I hope it's been of help, because I know we all have these moments where we flounder, and sometimes we just need to be reminded of things we already know. And having that reminder keeps us on the straight and narrow and keeps us going, so we can finish those stories, finish those revisions, and get them out into the world. I'm just going to finish off by saying thank you for listening, and please do go leave a review if you enjoy what you hear. If you haven't subscribed, please already do. And if you haven't discovered my YouTube channel, please head on over there. You'll find me at Emma Dhesi, and go and see what's on offer over on YouTube. But until next time, I will say cheerio. Cheerio.